You never know quite when you're going to go live.
View stream on YouTube. Let me share this as well.
You never know quite when you're going to go live. There you go. Just as I was saying, you never know quite when you're going to go live. That's it. So we have here Batsirai Madzonga. Thank you for joining me. Thank you, man. We've just had a good 15 or 20-minute chat, in fact, before we've gone live.
Thanks for having me, Adrian.
And you're in Dubai, right?
That is correct, in the UAE. Beautiful weather right now, this time of year.
What you doing out there?
I live next to the beach, so it's like the time of the year to go to the beach. So hopefully after this, we'll be hitting the sand.
Oh, wow. Wow. Good life. So that's an aspirational thing for a lot of designers, I'm sure. You can hit the beach after you're done with your calls.
Exactly.
So how did you, sorry?
I was going to say, hit the beach while you can, because it gets really hot, as everyone knows. So we have only maybe 4 or 5 months out of the year to go outside and do anything. So make hay while the sun shines.
So it gets too hot in the sense of like you can't even hide under the shade and be on the beach.
No, you can cook a steak in the shade.
Oh.
Although, when you hear that it gets extremely hot, you assume the worst. So when you eventually experience it, it's not as bad as, because you really expect the worst. That's what happened to me when I moved here. Everyone tells you like it's going to be super, super hot. So you really expect like super hot. But when you get here and everything's air conditioned and you're not really outside anyway, it's not that bad.
Yeah. How did you end up in Dubai then, and your story?
Sure. So most of my life I lived in Zimbabwe, Harare. After graduating, I went back there and started a design studio. Did that for 5 years, then ended up moving to South Afrika when I got married to start our life there. And 2 years into South Afrika, I managed to land a job in Dubai. So through a recruitment agency, I actually met the lady when I first moved to South Africa because I was looking for something to do. And so like a couple of years later, she hits me up and says, opportunity in Dubai, would you be interested? And I've always wanted to work overseas. So I said, yeah, let's do it. And managed to get it and moved.
Man, wow. And so take me back to where it started in Zimbabwe. You said you started with 5 years of your own agency. How did that come about? And what was the work like? What were you doing?
Cool. Yeah, it's actually an interesting time in history for Zim in general. So I studied computer science at University of Cape Town. So I graduated in 2007 and I moved back to Harare 2008. And 2008 is when like hyperinflation was hitting like Zimbabwe really hard. I don't know if you've heard the stories, but it was pretty bad. And that's when we kind of switched to the dollarized system, where in order to survive as a business, we had to bill our clients in US dollars instead of local currency. So that's what really helped us grow. In terms of how it started, a childhood friend of mine introduced me to a friend of his because he said, hey, Batsi, this guy likes computers. You like computers. I think you might get along. Like verbatim, that's literally what he said. He likes computers. You like computers. So I think you'll get along. Met the guy and he was very enterprising. He was also from kind of a technical background with code. He was basically like me in that he had a technical understanding and aptitude and a passion for code, but he was also a designer and a passion for the creative side. So I think meeting you know how when you're a designer who can code and design, they call you a unicorn. So you can imagine meeting another unicorn. It's like a once in a lifetime thing. So we hit it off, and he happened to be planning on starting to do his own thing. So I joined him in that endeavor. We worked from, my dad gave us a room to use at our house. So that was our first office. But he told us, you're here, but I'm only giving you, like, I think it was 6 months, 3 or 6 months. If you guys don't make enough revenue to have your own office, then my son, do something else. So we hit the ball running, started meeting clients, bringing them to the house, doing work. It was great, good enough that we actually did manage to move out and rent an office in town. Couple months later, we got a personal assistant to handle the admin. We focused on growing the business. 5 years later, we're still at it. And it was an amazing time, because when you're working for yourself, it really gives you time to learn a whole breadth of skill sets. So I had to learn 3D, I had to learn code, I had to learn animation, I had to learn design and different aspects of design. And this is all in the context of, again, hyperinflation.
And how did that context of hyperinflation influence your choices as a designer, or maybe your taste, your aesthetic as a designer?
So I think my aesthetic as a designer was always benchmarked on global kind of standards, which is what I think set us apart as a design studio. Because a lot of the work that was, and maybe in some ways still is being done in Zimbabwe, isn't held up to a higher standard. So it's almost like where clients don't expect anything more than quote unquote mediocrity. So that's what they're given. It's changing now. I see it actually changing now when I look at some of the designers in Zim and their portfolios. But when you kind of rewind 10 years ago, when we were starting out in 2008, it wasn't as the quality of work being done wasn't that great. Also in the context of hyperinflation, a lot of people had to subsidize their income and salaries by doing side hustles, which manifested in a lot of people starting businesses and needing logos, websites, business cards, etc. So that's really where we came in and provided them a design solution that was cost effective, really, really high quality, and kind of geared for this, the startup community, because people had to subsidize their income by starting businesses. So a lot of our client base, probably 90%, for the first 4 years, were just ordinary people who needed to start businesses in order to survive. And it was quite fulfilling to actually be able to equip people to pursue other areas that would give their family income to survive. So it was quite fulfilling work as well.
So I've seen a piece at the Design Museum, I think in London, that actually has the Zimbabwean currency. And it's one of those very well-known posters, I believe.
Yeah.
Has there already passed enough time that people are feeling a sort of nostalgia for the times before, or utilizing that in kind of the creative outputs in some ways?
No, because unfortunately, Zim it's in a place where we're actually going back to 2008 days, where things are really bad and you're just trying to survive, you know. So it's in that place right now where people again have to go back to having something besides your salary to survive. Mm-hmm. So I think it gets far removed from the realm of nostalgia when you're still living in that reality. There's no opportunity for you to say, oh, you remember the days when hyperinflation 2008? when you're actually living in, it might not be hyperinflation, but it is still quite extreme inflation. And yeah, like people are just trying to survive.
How are designers reacting to it, and how are they responding through what they're doing, and are they trying to help people, or in what ways they can?
I feel that would be an accurate way of putting it. Creative people have always had that ability to empower other people through our work. So I feel like that's definitely still going on. So the creative community is still, and I've seen some really amazing work actually coming out of Zim now. And yeah, it's the future is looking bright for design in Zim.
Yeah, I've seen a lot happening, and a lot of the exciting designers coming from Zim actually these days.
Exactly.
That's good. Yeah. And then yourself, you've flown the nest, and you're abroad. So how is that work abroad kind of impacting your worldview, your life view?
That's a good question. I think I'm in a place where I'm fortunate enough to be experiencing things as they happen. So a lot of what's happening in the world right now is in kind of the space of digital transformation. And I'm blessed enough to be in a country that's at the forefront of some of that innovation from a digital point of view. And that actually allows me to use that experience and to talk to people back home and actually expose them to some of the things that are happening. So things that I now realize that I take for granted are things that are years away from happening in Zim for some of the reasons that we've spoken about, where they're in survival mode, not really looking at putting resources towards innovation. They're just in survival mode. So even businesses there, I mean, sure, their digital transformation will, as a necessity, has to happen in order for the companies there to survive. But it's certainly not a topic of conversation from what I've noticed. So even designers who, they still, I was chatting to a designer actually last month, and he was saying in their strategy meetings with marketing, they still talk about printing flyers and handing them out at traffic lights, right? And you don't see that anywhere here. It's all, everything is all digital, right? All your marketing spend is digital. But in their world, their marketing spend is printing out flyers, handing them out at traffic lights. That's their strategy. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, other ways that, from what you're seeing and the things that you're passing on, what are the highlights, and what are the things that the businesses, perhaps, even though they're struggling day to day, and even though they're still handing out flyers, are there things they need to be looking at, even though it seems perhaps out of context for their situation right now?
So I think it boils down to moving with the times, because social media and the digital space is very much alive in Zimbabwe. For instance, people there are very big on platforms like Twitter, obviously Facebook, and I'm not sure how much businesses are actually leveraging those platforms, because you still see like people in marketing, as far as I understand anyway, leveraging heavily on traditional media, not really digital media. And I'm not sure why that is, because some of the people that are in these marketing departments are quite young, and they should be kind of switched on to the cost of, not only the cost effectiveness of advertising digitally, but the effectiveness of it as well. So I honestly don't know why that change or that shift, the paradigm shift, hasn't happened yet completely.
Is there maybe something about the hierarchy and the way that ideas get presented within the system to higher ups, and then coming back to actually making those changes, right? Or if we've printed 1,000 flyers every time, then why shouldn't we this time?
I think you're absolutely right. So it is an organizational change that has to happen from the top down. I mean, you could try to implement change from the bottom up, but if the top doesn't agree, nothing's going to change.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so you've also spent time in Cape Town, right? And in
I studied
South
in,
Africa.
yes.
And what did South Africa teach you?
I think South Africa really opened the door to the world for me. Because for the first time, I was in an environment where digital came first. So my first job in South Africa was actually at a purely digital agency. Like 90% of their output was digital. And that really, really helped me shift my mindset from saying I'm really good at designing logos and business cards to I now know how to design an effective Google Display Network banner, for example. So it was really an intro into what would now become my career going forward, which is digital.
Mm. And now your career, you're doing what sort of kind of things can you tell us about that you're working on?
Sure.
Or you have worked on recently, yeah.
So it's mostly, again, it's mostly digital. So websites, apps, and software platforms. I was just working at MSMBD, which is one of the biggest banking groups in the UAE. I was the design system lead there. So the work there involved working on their internal platforms as well as their retail banking solutions like your internet banking and the mobile app. So that was really cool to work in a large organization that really and truly put digital first. I think they're probably the most digitally mature organization in the Middle East, because some of the things they do, other companies, even in the UK, like we were chatting to a vendor from the UK, and some of the things we're doing with design tokens and development, they reference as being utopic and not realistic. But they didn't realize that this is stuff we do every day at the bank. So even some institutions in Europe are behind in as far as implementing development and DevOps practices, design ops practices, the way MSMBD was doing. So it was really good time for me to be in that place where your innovation is encouraged and supported, like we're talking about top down, bottom up. From the CEO going down, everyone was on the same bandwagon. So you could make suggestions for innovation. You could make suggestions based on what the rest of the world was doing, and it was received with open arms because everyone wanted to innovate and be the best. So taking that experience through, you actually find that my experience at the bank in financial services becomes like a niche because you now get sought after for that particular bit of experience in financial services, digital product design.
And so I'm gonna jump across as well and share my screen because I'm excited to have you on as well because of Sankofa. So this was shared by yourself, I believe, on a WhatsApp group, the Paddy probably WhatsApp group, and I jumped on the opportunity to try it out, and we
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, and we really felt like it felt right at the time to use it, and we're going to be using it as the theme font for Nairobi Design Week 2021 for the words together. So people will be seeing that all over our feed, etc. So even though you're based abroad and you have been for a while, you're still active in the African design scene. And you're still keeping up to date and creating projects such as this one. So how did Sankofa come about?
Cool. Yeah. So Sankofa, I think it's it's really a combination of a lot of things. So I would say the seed started when I met Saki Mafundikwa, and because I lectured at his institution Ziva in Zimbabwe for a couple of years, and when I watched his TED talk on typography, and I mean he is globally well known for this topic in particular, it opened my eyes to the fact that as designers who are trained in obviously design, we're not really exposed to other, be it writing systems or the history of design in other cultures, because most of our curriculum, most of our studies are based on American and European kind of authors and material and curriculums. So to watch Saki's talk where he speaks of the writing systems from Africa being much older than even writing systems in places like Babylon, for instance, it was quite eye-opening. So I would say that's where it started as a seed, because in his TED talk he actually speaks of the Sankofa writing kind of system from Ghana, which is where he gave a whole presentation on the symbols that were created there. So Sankofa, just for everyone's from a context point of view, is a writing system. It's a glyph in a writing system from Ghana, and Sankofa means to learn from the past and to return and get it. So return to your roots, learn from the past. And it felt like it made sense years later when I was looking, working at MSMBD now. And because it's a banking group based in the Middle East, there's certain things that we're starting to look at, like how do we appropriate culture in a way that's bespoke to our users, like talking about that user-centered design approach. And how do we represent certain things, like, for example, a home icon. The way a home icon is represented online right now is typically just a house, right? Western design, a house with an angled roof, that's a home icon. But when you look at houses in Morocco or houses in South Africa or houses even in the Middle East itself, the architecture doesn't lend itself to align with that kind of home icon. So I was just thinking to myself one day, like how, if you were to use design systems, which I was doing at the time, how would you use design systems to create, to reappropriate your digital products from a cultural perspective? And that's kind of where Sankofa came. Because I'm African, I grew up in Africa, lived most of my life in Africa. It seemed like a logical starting point to kind of experiment with that notion of how, if you were to culturally appropriate things like typography and iconography, even color palettes, how would you do it? So I started researching on African design, African writing systems, etc., and Sankofa was born.
Thank you. So these design systems, so there's many questions I have, but as we're talking about design systems and these houses and these icon sets, is there, how perhaps could you tell me through like the process of designing one of these icons and adjusting it to suit the style? And the houses, right? You picked up on the houses, for example.
Yeah.
And how those are different. Could you talk about that more?
Yeah. So I think these were all really based on my own personal life experience. And the real reason I actually created the Sankofa project is to try and empower designers from all over the world, not just African designers, but empower designers to look at the way things are done and try and look at it from the perspective of your own life experience, your own cultural history and where you're from. So to create these icons, I really just drew from my own experience. So growing up, we used to, where my grandparents lived was in the rural areas. And the architecture basically looks like the top left, the top right corner, that house icon there, which I think they call them rondavel houses. So it's a round structure made of clay and mud, and the frame is made using like branches of wood, etc. And in the roofs are made using grass. Just like really traditional architecture, and it's very similar in structure to how traditionally houses in South Africa were created, for example, like using that rondavel design. So a lot of these are basically based on my own life experience. And a lot of them because I had to kind of fill in the blanks, because obviously a settings icon, there's no real world counterpart to a settings icon. So some of them will look similar to.
Hey man, sorry, my internet's gone. I'm just resetting the router. It popped up with a red light. I'll be back on hopefully in a minute. Well, hello.
Hey, go back.
Oh, we're good. Okay. And it looks like we're still live or not?
Yes, we are.
Oh,
I
perfect.
think because I was online, it stayed online.
In that case, I think we're good. I'm on my phone now. So.
Oh, okay.
Just give me 5 to set up, 5 seconds. Hopefully, does the mic work?
I can hear you.
Okay. Okay, we'll do it over 4G. So just you were telling me about Sankofa and how it all began.
Yes. So just to kind of recap on that, I was talking about how the seed was first sown by Saki Mafundikwa by when I watched his TED Talk. And when I was now working in the UAE, and we're having discussions as a design team on cultural appropriation. Because we're a Middle Eastern, we were a Middle Eastern company, while I was still working there. I'm not working there anymore. That's why I'm speaking in past tense. So yeah, we're a Middle Eastern company, and we were designing our icons internally. And when we got to the home icon, I started to see how we've been doing the home icon the same way for ever since I started, right? Digital design, like 2008. It's always been the exact same icon. And I was starting to question, now that I was in design systems and seeing how design systems were used to scale design, are we able to use design systems to create culturally inclusive design? So depending on where your users are, could you change your home icon, for example, to something other than what they're traditionally used to seeing? And it'll still make sense to them because it's a home icon that's based on that particular culture's idea of what a house or home looks like. So I started asking these questions, and because I'm African, the first experience I would obviously draw from is my experience growing up in Africa, and what things like home or financing or banking or archiving, in other words, storing storage. How did that stuff look like when I was growing up? And that's how the icon set came to be.
And what sort of challenges have you faced as an African designer, as an African creative, or just as an African in going into new cultures and presenting your own culture and making sure that your viewpoints are represented?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I would say none, because as an industry where we really draw from like international standards and international trends. So being an African designer designing in Dubai, there's not much quote unquote African inspiration I can draw from, because we're not necessarily designing for Africa. We're designing, it's even worse in Dubai because 90% of the populace is expatriates. So you're looking at people from over 120 countries living in Dubai, and that's who you're designing for. So you really do have to be inclusive. You have to be, I wouldn't say generic, but in a certain way, you have to be true to your company's brand, but also not too culturally specific, because you're catering for a customer base that has over 120 countries, right? So if my experience being an African designer doesn't really contribute to my experience here, because we're designing based on international trends, international best practices and best in class approaches. So yeah, I wouldn't say it affected much.
So what about that kind of shared experience of so many nations under one country, under one label? What have you learned, maybe picked up or seen as commonalities between the Emirates and between Africa?
Yeah, I think the most common element is we all look up to the same kind of design gods, if I'm to put it that way. So a client brief in South Africa will say, and I've literally heard this, or I've had this experience, we want a website that looks like Apple, right? That's a South African client. You're in Dubai, same narrative. We want a website that looks like Apple. So we all have the same North Star when it comes to design. So it's when you put designers in a room that come from like 5 different countries, as was in our case, even more than 5 in some cases, we all have the same North Star. So it's really easy to align on aesthetics and ways of working and etc. Because we all kind of striving to be the best in the way that the world currently views the best as being, whether it's Apple, whether it's Google's material design, whatever it is, we're all striving to kind of be the best in that framework. So we all kind of aligned on how to approach our design practice. So it's quite refreshing that even though I'm a designer from Zimbabwe, I can meet a designer from Italy whose first language is Italy, but we're speaking the same language from a design point of view.
I just realized I'm not sure if this is recording.
It'll
be on. Well, it will be on the live stream anyway.
On YouTube, yeah.
So, it's interesting you bring up Apple. Get brought up a lot, of course, and we all grew up looking up to them for many good reasons, I guess. And we've kind of grown up, perhaps. I always looked up to minimal design and the minimal aesthetic and aspired to that. And we kind of grew up in this period when design was trying to almost standardize itself. And now we've managed to do that, and every website looks the same. and now we're kind of in this, maybe, I don't know if we're in this moment or just before this moment, but where people are trying to differentiate themselves, right? It's almost like you spend your childhood, I've heard that as well, you spend your childhood trying to be the same as everyone else and spend your adult years trying to be different to everyone else, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's part of the reason Sankofa came to be, because I started writing articles on Medium, and I was looking for topics to write on. And one of the topics that I thought of was what is the current state of our digital landscape versus the state of our physical landscape. And to write that article, I started looking at images of cultures from around the world. So it's all really, and if you look at like cultures in China, Japan, India, Africa, you name it, even Russia, with the way the architecture and the colors kind of come through there, and the textures, it's all really colorful. It's all really vibrant. You can tell Indian architecture next to Russian, you can tell the difference right from the get-go. There's no commonality at all. But when you look at an Indian website and a Russian website, that falls through. So I started to think, why is that? And that's again where Sankofa came through, where I was saying a designer in India is looking at Apple as this is the epitome of web design, and a designer in Russia is doing the exact same thing. So we end up in a place where minimalism, less is more, white space, all of those terms end up kind of directing us towards a design language that's exactly the same across the world. And it has its merits, it has its good and its bad, but I think to your point, it's ending up in a place where our digital world isn't really representative of our physical world, and I feel like we're losing a lot from that perspective.
Yeah, it's that homogenization of these aesthetics, and it's also interesting. I remember, perhaps you gave the example of India. You'd go to like a shop in India and you'd see like a crazy designed poster, right? Or in Africa somewhere, or wherever really. And that design aesthetic is honest, at least, in the sense that it is actually trying to communicate what the people are presenting. And even though all the fonts may be different, and there may be there may be so many design rules broken, But now if they give you just a white leaflet that looks like KFC from the same restaurant, you might not actually be as excited to eat there, right? Because they're not trying to do their own thing. And
exactly. I like how you put in the authenticity angle, because it really is, how do you become more authentic in your kind of approach to design? And it's very difficult when you're designing it for, when I was presenting the Sankofa project to various creators, one question came up, started to come up a lot, which was, how do you reconcile creating culturally inclusive design with the personality of the brand? Like, how do you not lose the brand when you're trying to culturally appropriate that brand across various cultures, digitally across the world? And I think to answer that, my answer was, you don't need to lose your brand in the midst of that exercise, because it's really about the nuance of your design, not changing the entire design in its totality, but seeing where you can get the most bang for your buck, where you can change small things like your illustrations, your illustration color palette, not your primary brand color palette, your icon sets, what can you do there, the meaning of color in your digital products. And one designer actually pointed this out, where they were rolling out a Japanese digital product in Europe. And there's certain things that they had to change, because in Europe, X did not mean X, X meant Y. So they had to change the way they dealt with color, and in some cases, typography as well. So it actually started a conversation that I felt was worth having right now, where how do we become, as we homogenize our design, how do we shift to now being more culturally inclusive and not lose our real world heritage on the digital landscape?
Are there any things you've learned particularly in where you've been working recently, or other people that you've learned from who have really made an impact in the way that they allow you to look at a culture and kind of breakthrough ways?
Yeah, so I think Saki will probably be number one on that list, given that he's been unapologetically African in everything he does. And I think it's quite refreshing to have that. And there are a lot of actually African designers who are unapologetic in their heritage, and they bring out the African in the things they do. And I feel that's something that should be celebrated across the world.
Yeah, Saki Mafundikwa. So he gave a talk this week at the World Class Designers Conference. Did you manage to catch any of that?
No, I didn't, unfortunately.
It was amazing. It was really good, really well put together, and goes back to what we were talking about, I think, before we started recording and streaming, that it was organized with Africa largely in mind. And it's important to say that you can have a focus on Africa and African design without talking about it specifically in the name, but also these people putting it together can be world-class designers. And now we're seeing more world-class designers coming through from Africa.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Simon Charway was there as well. He talked about design and culture, and now it's popped out my head what his talk was called, but it was he talked about one slide really made an impact on me, where he talked about how no culture has the right to enforce a design aesthetic or a design sensibility on any other culture. And it kind of reminded me of what we're just talking about, really, on how it's it's very difficult to distinguish where one culture starts and another ends right now anyway. But it's definitely possible to kind of track back and look at history and learn from history. And also now to be seeing so much expression from many places of the world, that the creative industries in more established markets are really just trying to grab onto the amazing creative and trying to harness it within their own plans, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So have you got any other African teachers or mentors or people within the creative sphere, or just more broadly, that you've learned from?
From a creative point of view, I actually can't think of anything top of my head, because Saki has been such a pivotal. He might not know this because I haven't told him that he's pivotal for me, but he is. And I think
he has so many.
Yeah, for sure. And I can't remember his name, but there's an architect as well. I watched a TED talk on, and he also opened my eyes to the fact that the world of architecture kind of suffers from the same thing, where it's when you go to like, he went to school in the States, and when you learn architecture from a Western and European perspective, the danger is you take that into your profession, right? Same way designers are less is more oriented and minimalist oriented. And what he's done is the flip side of that, where he's gone back home and he's developing ways of building an architecture that are applicable to the people that are in his in his ecosystem and where he lives. It's quite interesting. I'll share with you the TED talk I'm talking about, so you can kind of get more perspective on what I mean. But it's amazing how he's taken his classical education and flipped that on its head to be able to innovate in Africa when it comes to building materials, the actual design of the buildings, and ways of building as well. It's quite interesting.
Are there things you've experienced that maybe would surprise you if you saw yourself 10 years ago, whether things you've worked on or things you've experienced or just mindsets that have changed?
I think the world has changed a lot since I started 10 years ago, because I wasn't necessarily planning on becoming a user experience designer. In many ways, I didn't even really know what that was until I started doing it. But I feel like it's just being a designer in the digital space is really where people need to be. Because when I speak to designers back home in Zim, some of them don't really know the career paths that are available on the digital space. And it's a shame, because by the time those people graduate and have a little bit of work experience, AI and automation would have taken over a lot of the mundane tasks that they're trying to perfect right now. So it's almost like you're learning a skill that's not going to be needed 5 years from now, because it's really shifting towards designers being problem solvers, not designers rolling out content, because machine learning can do that for us.
So how are you prepping then as a designer for what's coming? You know, the revolution that's coming in front of us.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I feel like having some kind of tech savvy helps. So I get asked this question a lot from young designers, like, because I have a development background, they always ask me, so I have no idea how to code. Do I need to learn how to code? Because I don't know the first thing about math and code. I'm a creative. But what I always tell them is you don't need to code, but you need to at least have an appreciation of how the technical aspect affects what you do and how what you do affects the technical aspect. Because when machine learning comes into play, you're going to need to understand how these systems, at least understand how they work, so you can better strategize and implement in when you're having your creative meetings and huddles, how you can best leverage that technology to get ahead. Because the design teams that are really going to be able to leverage that technology are going to leapfrog over designers that don't.
Mm-hmm. What about no-code tools? Have you been using any or come across any no-code tools?
Come again?
No-code tools. So you get to build stuff without coding, like drag and drop sort of things.
Yeah.
Like Figma.
Yeah, definitely. So what I'm actually more interested in is how those platforms are going to be 3 to 5 years from now, when the no code aspect really becomes mainstream. Because I don't feel like right now, the no code aspect is very mainstream. So when you say no code, you mean how design is automated, right? From design to a finished product without having to code.
Sorry about this. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Oh, well, good. So I'm back. Thank you. So no code tools. You were just about to start telling me about that.
Yeah. So when you say no code tools, can you kind of elaborate on what you mean?
Sure. So it's things that allow you to build a website, for example, without any code. Yeah, like Wix, like Squarespace, things like, I don't know if you've heard of Bubble or Asana, et cetera, Glide apps.
Yeah. So two things to kind of touch on there. So the first thing is no code tools are very real. And I feel like sometimes designers, especially back home where I'm from, aren't really clued up on how that really affects them. Because a lot of them are focusing on for example, when you're freelancing as a designer, you're creating websites and you're designing logos. That's like, I would say that's where the bulk of your work comes from, where a client wants a logo or a client wants a website. And the problem is both of those things are now freely available online without any skill needed whatsoever. So it's eroding. Like back when I was doing websites, you could charge $1,500 for a website easy because no code tool didn't exist. Now a client comes and you can't really charge for a corporate website the same amount, because you can go on Wix and do it in a few minutes and without being a designer, without being anything, because there's templates there ready for you. So for people to realize that they need to shift their focus on, okay, so a client needs a website. How do I add value that Wix or no code tools don't give that client? And I feel like that's where the focus needs to be, even if it's brand design, because you get those logo generators online, right? And most often than not, they're good enough for the client needs, because they're not trying to be a global brand. They just need to sell chickens to a supermarket. So they just need a basic logo. So you don't need a brand strategy and all that when a client just wants a $20 logo. So it starts to erode a lot of the value that designers used to have. And coming back to user experience design, how a no-code tool is going to affect us. And I was watching a talk given by this guy called Benjamin Wilkins, who at the time of the talk, I think it was about 3 years ago, he was at Airbnb. And he gave a demo on how by leveraging their mature design system and the way they built their components, they could sketch on a whiteboard during their brainstorm sessions. You could just sketch on a whiteboard, and by having your machine learning algorithm connected to a camera and object recognition, it could pick out the elements you're drawing and map it to an existing component in their design system.
Wow.
So it is quite amazing to see that live, where it's a whiteboard session, they're drawing stuff and designing kind of their wireframes and discussing design solutions. And the system is actually real time building their components, or building the solution using their built components. It is quite amazing. And what that showed me is, in the same way that traditional design has been commoditized, we're kind of going to a place where user experience, or UI design as they call it, right? Because there's always this duality of UI and UX. The UI part of it is becoming really, really mundane, as even today when I design, UI isn't really a key focus, because a lot of our clients have mature design systems. So as a UI designer, your job is just to make sure it's perfect. It's not really to innovate in as far as how the actual product ends up looking. It's more about the experience of using the product than how the product looks.
Exactly. It's no longer like, oh, where does this button go? Because there's kind of that system is within iOS or within Android as well, right? And so I guess I had a couple of questions that came up. Firstly, as we're talking about these no-code tools and we're praising them for the ability to give anyone, for again, democratizing design. And now looking back at what we were saying about every design looking generic, and now when you go in, if everyone's using Squarespace for their portfolio, then everyone's portfolio looks the same, right? As an example.
But I think that's the designer's fault, because there is a designer who's creating templates for Squarespace and for Wix. So nothing stops Wix from creating a Wix Africa.wix, where the step on Africa.wix is geared towards that market, right? Or Japan.wix, whatever it is. So it's really the responsibility of the people designing these templates, because I don't think it's machine learning that's designing Wix templates at the moment. It's probably someone's on his computer. So those people, or rather maybe let's put it on Wix, they need to have a platform where designers across the world can submit themes that are culturally inclusive or culturally, contextually appropriate for the environment they're living in. And maybe doing it that way would open it up to a lot more diverse kind of digital sphere.
Hey man, I'm still struggling. I don't know what's happening with the network today. It's such a great conversation. I'm going to keep trying, but I also don't want to hold you for too long. I was hoping we could kind of at least tie up if I managed to.
Let me just keep trying quickly.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh man, I even managed to come back on, and I could hear you playing my voice note. I was like talking to you, and you couldn't hear me, which was strange. Anyway, I'm very sorry. I have no idea what's happening with our network, home and mobile today. So I've been really loving this conversation, and I'm sure we could go on for ages, but also maybe we can come back to it once we've recovered the network, okay? Yeah. So were there other, we've kind of been cut off a couple of times, but were there other stories for this first time that you really wanted to share, and kind of any anecdotes that came to mind that you think would be useful for people to share?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing right now is the ability for creatives to really map out what the future of their desired career path is going to be, within the context of like the near future, 5 or 10 years. Because a lot of the designers that are in school right now, for example, in African design schools, I worry that they're not learning the right thing and they're not being exposed to the right thing. Because when you're now when you're now trying to get a job, or when you're now trying to freelance and design, the world's going to be very different to what you're learning in school right now, be it in design school or wherever you are in Africa. I feel like there are conversations about, especially around technology, that need to be had in order to make sure that young designers are equipped for what's coming.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And even for ourselves as well, there's kind of going to be a time when people who feel young and feel like they shouldn't be getting left behind are going to be getting left behind, right? We have someone, a friend of ours called Esther Kute. She's done a lot of things and teaches as well, and we always have these conversations about the future of design and tech, and looking really at if truck drivers and Uber drivers are feeling threatened now, then Canva is one step there, and Squarespace. And then the next step in Russia has already been taken, because there was an AI last year that fooled clients. From Arklabiedev,
I saw that, and I give that as a great example as well, like to show, like, because people aren't hearing these stories, and when they hear AI, they think we're far away from that reality, when in fact it's happening today.
So, and that really, that designers need to develop what their skill set is and what they're offering, right? And they still have a lot to offer, but just have to bear in mind that it's beyond the tools that you're using.
Absolutely, and I feel like it's just about the example. Another example I was giving is when you look at technologies that are being developed, for example, with Elon Musk's Neuralink, and how they're creating ways for human beings to interact with tech in ways that aren't limited by our physical limitations, right? Because currently, our inputs and outputs with technology is based on our fingers, is based on screens that we're seeing and the information that's coming there. And as designers, we're currently designing according to those limitations, right? So all our UX best practices on accessibility, typography, colors, use of all that stuff is based on screens and how people interact with technology today. So when that no longer becomes an issue 10 years from now, even 5 years from now, when Neuralink goes live with brain implants that allow you to stream Spotify directly to your brain, as an example, how does that affect designers working at Spotify, right? When all their design systems currently are tailored towards screens. So as designers, we need to actually see, okay, you project yourself 5-10 years from now. How do I pivot my understanding of design? How do I pivot, like you're saying, my skill sets? How do I open my mind to just even the possibility that the design practice can happen on interfaces that are purely in someone's mind? How does that even look like? So we need to start thinking like this if we're going to survive as designers. Because really where the world's the world's not going to change in that way, because it's already happening, and it needs to happen for the next frontier of our kind of development as a species is concerned.
Yeah, and it's just that we've been developing so very quickly that we're barely managing to keep up with in the span of one human lifespan. So much happens that it's really, I'm not surprised that what must our grandparents think, right? In